Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 4, Episode 15, Sons of Mogh. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely, and as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are great, we're awesome, and of course, we're a good time. We're trying to expand things and make things more enjoyable for all sci-fi fans in general, whether you just like Star Trek like we do or everything else. Okay? So as David said, yes, tonight we are talking about the Sons of Mogh, a really interesting episode, and I think kind of an underappreciated episode for the development of Worf.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to really get into it, but like always, before we get into all of that, love to check in. So, David, tell us, how has your week been?
It's been good. Been fairly uneventful. Work has had its ups and downs, but work is work. I finished book 2 of the Altered Carbon series this week, Broken Angels. Summary is that I think the season 2 of the show was a better story because they deviated heavily from this. There's like nothing from this in the second season. And frankly, that just makes sense. Not only because this book is pretty gritty and dark and just not, it wouldn't make for good television because no one would watch it. It'd be rated R pretty heavily. But the story gets a little meandering, unfortunately, and so the show just did a better job of finding another way of telling a more interesting, compelling story. But I appreciated continuing to read. Richard Morgan is the author, reading his sci-fi because it's different. It's a very film noir type world, very dark and not your hero is not a knight in shining armor. He's a guy just trying to get by in life in a world where death is actually kind of meaningless because your body can be regrown and you can get new bodies at any time. And so interesting book. Wasn't quite as good as the first one. Wasn't quite as good as the show, I would say. But I'm happy to read that one, and I'll read the third one at some point because I gotta get to Expanse book 4. I'll join you in reading that here in a minute. I'm gonna read something else first because I need to finish that.
Hey,
but
that's fine because, like I said, it just gives me more time to get it finished. And I just want to further, to reiterate, it's not that I'm a slow reader; it's just finding the time to read.
Oh, I at work.
Difficult.
At work, I have so much time to knock out reading.
For those of you who don't know, David and I used to work the same job where we just had endless hours of uninterrupted time to read or do just whatever, Unfortunately, that is gone for me now. Right. And so now I'm squeezing in, I've got 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. You might catch an hour or something like that to just sit and read. And it's just difficult. I enjoy the book, and I find that like when I really, it seems like right when I get into the groove of reading, I've got to stop. And I'm like, so tedious. Yeah.
The one problem with this book here is that the main character is the only character. Like the plot from the first book does not anything really to connect to the second book. Only that the main character is still the main character, but the plot line, the setting is 100% different. And so there's also not a development of character interactions like you can get in The Expanse, where you have your main cast and new characters coming in to bring a new fresh take on the characters. But so that means that the Expanse series, you're building the storyline continually, whereas this one, brand new situation, the main character is one you've already read from, but it means
that's an interesting point that you make about that book, because when the series was on Netflix, that might be why it ultimately failed and was canceled, because like for people like me who knew nothing of the Altered Carbon series, we watched the whole first season, loved it, and were ready for the second season, tuned in for the second season, and beyond the main character being the same individual, everything else was changed, and we were given no explanation for it.
Well, none. even the actor playing the main character is different. Anthony Mackie,
I'm saying the character as in name was the same, but yes, the person playing him was different. Everything was different, and they gave us no real explanation for it. maybe if I had read the books and was familiar with the series, that wouldn't have bothered me as much. But I do know that that is like one of the main things that took me out of the series was suddenly everybody was different and there was no reasoning.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, again, I think he's an interesting writer. He basically has come up with a very unique world and or setting that is, and so it's interesting to follow. But the first one was just better, and the
mm,
show also did a better job of like fixing some of the problems with the book from book to show. Anyway, don't want to keep going, but
yeah.
other thing is watched the last of the Mission Impossible movies in preparation for the new movie coming out, and I know you had
Okay.
started watching some of those.
I
How
had
far did you get?
started. I watched number one. I watched number two. I was so thoroughly disappointed with number two. I have
I
not
told you.
started number three.
I told you,
It,
man. You can't let it get you
it,
down. You just got to move
yeah.
past it.
I have to admit, it took the wind completely out of my sails. I was just like, I can't believe how bad it
Oh, I
is.
know. Number two
And
is.
it's and this, we talked about this a little bit when I was getting close to finishing the movie. The movie reminded me so much of a lot of like anime. You know, there's so many like certain the way certain scenes were filmed, and there's a lot of stoic close-ups. You know, we have to
Yes.
see the full feature of the face and the hair and the highlighting and the feather lighting around the eyes and all this stuff. And then there's like these high action split sequences that are happening that really they don't do anything other than add flash. Like we don't necessarily
Right.
need them to continue the plot of the movie. And so
Right.
yeah, just a lot of things that were just kind of like the moment that you felt like you were kind of getting into the pacing of the movie, they would do something like that that would immediately take you right out. At least for me. And so
Right.
it was this weird kind of stop start stop start stop start, and then there was just no justification for the romantic angle. You know, it was much too fast, much too soon. Not
Yes.
enough dialogue to explain it. There's just so
Right.
many things that, again, if you were reading this, perhaps, or maybe if this was in an anime where they do this a lot, where you hear the internalized thoughts of the characters. You know, someone's doing the internal monologuing. You know, I
Right.
think that that might have helped out, but obviously for a live action movie, they're never going to do that. So
Right.
it just everything seemed very one dimensional, not even two dimensional. It was just a very flat movie.
Right.
And yeah, it just didn't work for me. So I'll probably end up watching three either later tonight, if that's been my habit lately, not being able to sleep. I'll throw it on, or I'll watch it tomorrow. And then if it's good enough, then I'll try to power through three
I'd
and
say
four.
number three is one of the best in the series. I mean,
Okay.
I'll quickly just say this that four, I'm sorry, 5 and 6 have the most tightly aligned plot in terms of like what happens in 5 is more important to what happens in 6 because most of them are pretty isolated. At least the first like 4 are fairly isolated in their storyline, but then they start like actually having a storyline that actually carries over. And I think that might play a feature in the new one coming out.
Okay.
But number 3 is let me put it this way: it's the first one I ever saw as a kid. I didn't see the first one and then like the second one, then the third one. The third one is the first one I ever saw, and so that's the one that in my mind stands out. It's the classic one for me, even though the first one has the classic, drop down scene and everything. So yeah, number 3 is great. I think you're gonna really appreciate that one a lot more than 2. Number 2 is the hiccup in the series.
Okay.
The other thing I was gonna say is that once now that I've finished watching the Mission Impossible movies in preparation for the new one, I want to watch all of Christopher Nolan's filmography in preparation for Oppenheimer coming out, which comes out the week after Mission Impossible. And there are 11 films of Christopher Nolan, and then the new one is his 12th. So I have to find a way to watch 11 movies in about 12 days, which I'm sure I'll be able to
I was
manage
gonna
it, but I
say,
have
yeah,
to be
11. Yeah,
disciplined about it.
11 movies in 12 days, and yeah, okay, you can get it done.
Yeah,
You
it
can
can
get it done.
happen. Yeah. So
And
that's
meanwhile,
number
while you're doing that, and obviously not reading the fourth book in the Expanse series, I will be hopefully finishing so that by the time that you actually begin to read it, I can be bugging you to hurry up so we can do our After Dark. My
yeah.
plan is to finish the book and then go back and watch
Yes.
season
Season
three.
4.
See,
4.
I wanted to go back and watch season 3 and then go into season 4.
Oh, okay.
Um, Yeah, just because I feel like it helps to flow better to get you ready for what's next, and then since this will still be fresh in my mind, I'll be able to appreciate both 3 and 4.
Okay.
I think there's a little bit of overlap between the two seasons. I want to see if I can pinpoint that, if that's true or not. So for those of you who are following along, again, it's book 4 of the Expanse series. So far, I'm really enjoying it. I like the fact that we are dealing more with the protomolecule in this book. That's something that I felt like was really lacking in the show. I understood why, because that would have required a lot of CGI and also a lot of like heavy tech explanation, which I think they were trying to avoid. They wanted to make this story as realistic as possible, make you relate to the characters as much as possible. So there was kind of
Right.
a departure from certain language and things like that. But the books obviously don't do that.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really enjoying that kind of filling in the blanks on that part. So
Right.
yeah, and then of course we'll do our Fire Caves After Dark where we talk about the book and all that stuff once David gets there. Okay.
Cool. Right.
Um, so yeah, we'll keep you updated on that. In fact, with the pacing, the way things are going, it will probably end up being our 100th episode. This is episode 93 for us. So by the time we get to the 100th, most likely it would be an After Dark special anyway.
Okay.
So yeah, just keep that in mind for those of you who are paying attention, of course. But we're not here to talk about all of that stuff. We are here to talk about the Sons of Mogh,
Mm.
the infamous Klingon brothers, who've kind of been our window into Klingon culture and society and so forth from opposite ends. Worf being
Right.
adopted by humans, and then Kern, who grew up in Klingon society.
Right.
So, would you like to give the recap, or
Nah,
would you?
man, this is definitely gonna be a
I,
you episode.
I knew that. I knew that. I just thought I would ask. I just thought I would ask. All right. So this episode starts with Worf and Jadzia in the holodeck, and they're sparring. They're doing some combat practice, and she's obviously worn something very flattering to attract Worf's attention, which clearly works. And then as they're kind of getting close, they get interrupted because Odo calls to say that a drunk Klingon has appeared on the station and is demanding to see Worf. Worf goes to meet this Klingon, and it's Kern, his brother, who was introduced to us all the way back in Next Generation, as he was the Klingon exchange officer who comes aboard the Enterprise and really kind of gives everybody
Yeah.
but Worf a hard time until he reveals himself. And that kind of sets a chain of events in motion, which leads to the discovery of the Duras family's treachery and their partnership with the Romulans, and ultimately almost Klingon civil war and a war with the Federation, Worf stepping down from the Federation, and then ultimately accepting discommodation and returning to the Federation. So a lot of things happen when Kern pops up, and you know
Yeah.
what? This time is really no different. Once again,
Yep.
Kern pops up and brings trouble with him.
Yeah.
So he's drunk, he's angry, and he demands that Worf perform what's called the Maktovar ritual, which is basically has to kill him. So we find out that because of Worf and his what we saw earlier in the Way of the Warrior episode in the first part of season 4, Worf having sided against Gowron in his move to start war with the Cardassians has now received the ultimate dishonor, and the family has been stripped of all lands, titles, properties, everything. Now, this didn't really affect Worf much because Worf was a Starfleet officer and he lived within the Federation. But Kern, on the other hand, who was a high ranking official, had a seat on the High Council, captained his own ship, had lands, had all this stuff. All of that was taken from him because he was Worf's brother.
Right.
So now that Kern has nothing, he has now decided that the only way he can have his honor restored to him is through this ritual killing practice. Worf is like, I guess we can assume he was against it, but
Right.
he decides to go through with it. He
Right.
gets together the various ceremonial things that are needed to do it. He gets the giant, wicked looking dagger. I mean, that thing was just a magnificent blade, but man,
Painful.
and he
Rips and
and he
tears. I'm
stabs
sure.
and he stabs Kern in the chest, effectively killing him. And almost immediately after this happens, Jadzia and Odo arrive in Worf's quarters. Jadzia has Kern beamed to the infirmary where he is saved. And Odo's like, you better hope that he lives, because if he's not, you're going to be charged with murder. Kern does live, but this does land Jadzia and Worf smacked in front of a very angry Cisco, who delivers a very on point speech about religious and cultural tolerance,
Right.
and what it means to be in Starfleet, which is, he kind of echoes a bit of what Picard had said to Worf also in the Next Generation about cultural leniency, basically. And this is back when Worf beamed aboard Kempek's ship and killed Duras after Duras had killed Kalar. The Klingons were like, yeah, matters closed. They did what they had to do. Honor is satisfied. But Picard was like, you are a Starfleet officer. We have all these other civilizations, cultures that have decided to become a part of Starfleet. That means all of that stuff drops at the door. Once you come in and you put on your uniform, you are a part of us now. You got to do things a certain way. Basically expressing his disappointment in Worf's decision to kill Duras. I wasn't disappointed. I was glad Duras was dead. But I digress.
Yeah.
So now we're here with Cisco, who's basically given them kind of the riot act. He's firing off at both Jadzia and Worf, because they've both taken these hardcore approaches to Klingon culture and society, which are definite lefts from what Starfleet would like. And after reading them the riot act, he kicks them out of his office, and he's like, "Yeah, find another way to solve your family problems." Kern is indignant when he wakes up and realizes that he's alive and not dead, and that Worf is not there to finish the ritual. He basically calls Worf the worst Klingon, and this kind of weighs on Worf for a bit. He decides that it's time to figure out next steps for Kern. They end up getting Kern a job with Odo's security force. He's pretty good at the job, but then he lets himself get shot. Basically, he tries to commit suicide by phaser in this particular part of the scene.
Right.
Odo, realizing that Kern has a death wish, decides to dismiss him from his charge or whatever. And yes, and then kind of send him on his way. Meanwhile, while this is happening, our B plot involves Kira and O'Brien on their way back from doing some survey mission with some Bajorans, and they see a mysterious explosion, and a ship decloaks, and it's a Klingon ship, and the ship pretty much warns them back into Bajoran space. They alert Cisco. Cisco's like, well, we got to figure out what's going on here. Take the Defiant, go back out, see what else you can determine with your scans. They do this, and while they're scanning, another explosion occurs, and this time it's on a Klingon battle cruiser, and there's like a huge gaping hole blown in the battle cruiser. They tow the battle cruiser back to Deep Space Nine, and the officers are sitting around talking about what's going on, what's causing the explosions, why are there Klingons hovering just outside of Bajoran space, and they're cloaked, and they're trying to piece it all together. And then that's when Worf realizes it's their mines. They are laying cloaked mines just beyond the borders of Bajoran space, and they need to put a stop to this before ships run into them and blow up. Right. And basically, if the Klingons are successful in mining this area, they would cut Bajor and Deep Space Nine off from the rest of the Federation, and basically be a perfect choke point for them to begin an all-out war with the Federation if they wanted to. So realizing they've got this issue, they need to get a hold of the plans for the mines. They go to Kern to get this information because Kern was a high-ranking official at one point, and he would have had access. He kind of refuses, but Worf helps him see that this is the right thing that they need to do. So they, disguise themselves, go on board the Klingon ship. They find the information that they need, but before they can leave, Kern ends up killing another random Klingon officer who was actually about to kill Worf. This also upsets Worf greatly because apparently he's upset that he wasn't able to see that the man was about to try to kill him, and he realizes that there is something different about him, something that's changed in him that makes him different from other Klingons, including Kern.
Right.
So now that they have this information, they reveal to the Klingons that they're going to stop them from mining, which they do. But this still leaves them with a question of what to do about Kern. Worf makes contact with an old family friend who owes them a favor, and they decide to basically continue the genetic modification they had done that helped them sneak aboard the Klingon ship in the first place. And they surgically alter Kern's appearance and his genetic makeup, and they completely erase his memory of Worf and who he is as a son of Mogh. He is no longer the son of Mogh. And
Right.
he wakes up under and is told a new name, which is Rodek, and he leaves with his new father. And as he's leaving, he stops and he sees Worf, and he asks if Worf is part of his family, to which Worf replies, I have no family. And then Kern leaves, he leaves. It's a very sad moment, and then that's the end of the episode. That's it. Worf
Yeah.
is now well and truly alone. All of his
Right.
family is essentially dead. He is the only. He's not just the son of Mogh. He is Mogh. He is Worf Mogh.
It's not
Basically,
sons of Mogh, it's son of Mogh, and even that
yes,
is nothing anymore. I
yes.
I was a little sad to read. I was reading the Wikipedia article for this episode in preparation for this recording for us tonight, and it does say that this is the last time we ever see Korn. And I was sad to see that because, of course, there's still, we're in season 4. There's,
They're in season 4, right? Yes,
I
this
would
is the
think,
last time that Kern is ever seen again.
right.
Um,
I mean,
which
I really,
bothers me. It bothered
yeah,
me for a while
yeah.
because of what happens towards the end of the show and everything else. There are several times where I was like, "What about Kern?" Like it'll
Oh,
come
yeah,
up and we'll get there, and there'll be plenty of times where I'll be like, "Yeah, what about Kern?" But
yeah,
yeah, this episode, I'm just gonna go right into it. Like I've always loved the character of Worf. I think that he is. Um, the development of the character, especially on Deep Space Nine, when it really just hits a whole other level, I think he's just a great character. I always disliked the whole handling of his son Alexander and how that all played out. But if you cut that part out of the
yeah.
Worf character dynamic, Worf is a great character. He was an
Right,
orphan who is trying to understand himself in relation to the people who raised him and to the culture that he has completely been, alienated from.
right,
Even when he would go and visit his cousins and so forth, he's told us several times how he didn't fit in. He wasn't the same. We
right,
see this several times, even on the Next Generation when he joins Kern and they go to whatever planet they were on, and everybody's drinking and laughing and carrying on, and Worf is all standoff, and he's like, "Wait a minute, we were just fighting these guys. Like,
right,
why are we here drinking with them?" And Kern's like, "Well, this is neutral ground. We're not warriors against each other here. We're just people who are relishing the fact that we're still alive to carry on another day and so forth." And Worf
yep,
wants to, okay, now he wants to talk about battle strategy and plan or whatever else. Kern's like, "No, we're not doing any of that. Like the time for work is over. This is
right,
enjoyment only." And
right.
Worf
I
just
remember that
can't
scene.
seem to, yeah, Worf just can't seem to get into it.
Right,
And then, this episode kind of highlights once again those distinct differences between the two of them. Yes, Worf was upset by the discommendation and the taking of the lands and titles and properties and everything else, but he still views himself as a very honorable man, and that he's
right,
doing the right thing by not just by himself, but also by greater Klingon society as a whole. Now,
right,
this is the first time that we've come face to face with someone on the other side of Worf's actions. And we hear that how important family is, and that kind of dynamic, how it plays out. And this is the first time we've ever got to really see that. We've heard it many, many times, but now we're really getting to see that. And Kern does a great job of hitting home just how different he and Worf really are from each other.
yeah. It's said by Kern at one point. I wish the two of us had grown up together. I don't care if we had both grown up on Earth. We have both grown up in Klingon society. I don't understand you, um, and I wish we had grown up together. We both had the same cultural understandings, because yeah, he is really frustrated and upset with Worf's decisions. His
Mm-hmm.
conscience. With going against Gowron as the leader of the Empire, even though he himself had objected to the
Yes.
war on the Klingon Council, he also obeyed his leader when the war started. So,
We can actually, and just real quick, we can actually go back a bit further and say that, Kern has never been a fan of Gowron. If you remember all the way back in the Next Generation episode where the Duras family was challenging Gowron's claim to the High Council, to the chancellorship, um, Gowron had very little support,
right.
and Worf was basically blackmailing Gowron by saying, "I can get Kern and the ships that he commands to support you."
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what got Gowron interested in listening to what Worf had to say, was because he knew who Kern was. He knew of
Right.
Kern and the battle group that he commanded and his military prowess. He knew who he was. So
Right.
it's clear already that Kern had a pretty substantial standing, regardless of his
Yeah.
attachment to Worf.
Yep.
And when Worf went to Kern to get his support, Kern immediately was like, "No, I don't like Gowron. He's an outsider." Basically, he was like, "He's weird and he's gross. I don't want to have anything to do with him." But Worf was like, "I'm the elder brother. You will do as I
Yes.
say," and he
Yes.
did. And now
Right.
here we see yet again repercussions of the actions.
Right.
Here is Kern being the one dealing with all the fallout.
Yeah, and he even says to Worf in this episode, like, "You're the older brother. Tell me what to do. I'm going to obey you." He's really upset about it, torn up, depressed. I mean, again, he comes on the stage, but it's an interesting dynamic they have. Worf has, and this is part of the episode, Worf has his identity as a Federation officer to keep him going, but Kern doesn't. He is only ever a Klingon, and if his Klingon identity is destroyed, and there's no way for him to, it's interesting. For some reason, Klingon culture doesn't allow Kern to separate himself from Worf in terms of, Worf made a decision.
Yeah.
Worf was the head of the house. Kern, I mean, maybe he could have betrayed Worf and said, "I'm not going to go with Worf. I'm going to follow the Emperor and keep my, like make some sort of, civil war within the House of Mogh." But he chose not to, which is interesting. His honor is to follow Worf's
So
decision. Go ahead.
I've thought about that, and Klingon, the caste system and the hierarchy, is very strict, but it does allow for people to make changes when necessary. We've seen this a few times within the society that when the circumstances are drastic enough, you
Right.
can make alterations.
Right.
In this case here, I think that Kern was stuck because there were no other sons of Mogh. They were
Right.
trying to hold on to what was left of their house after their mother and father were killed, and assuming there were any other children of Mogh, we're assuming they were all wiped out. As far as we know, only Worf and Kern are left. And not
Right.
only is Worf the elder brother, but Worf is also the only one who has a son. Kern
Right.
has no children. So
Mm.
because of this also places a greater importance on Worf's status, because if something were to happen to him, then it falls not just to Kern, but also to Alexander.
Xander.
And Alexander, as the only son of the firstborn child, would have a higher ranking. And
Right.
so I think that this is another reason why Kern was kind of stuck, because under any other circumstances, as the secondborn, he would have been well within his rights to challenge Worf if he felt like Worf was making bad decisions for the family, and that
Right.
it was his job now to lead the rest of the family. But there was no rest of the family. We
Right.
know that Klingons do promotions through ritual combat.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can attain a higher rank if the person ahead of you has been deemed incompetent, and then you can't just call them incompetent, but you also have to defeat them in battle.
Right.
Worf has
Right.
told us this. He told us this on Next Generation. We've seen this on a couple of Klingon ships. When Riker did the Klingon cultural exchange, this was how things are run there as well. So we know this is kind of the things that are in place for how their society works. So I think that in this case, that's why Kern was so devoted to doing what Worf wanted, because there was only two of them. And if they
Right.
had any hope of us reestablishing their family and improving the lineage and hoping that Alexander comes along and comes into his own and has a lineage to work with and has the lands, titles, and everything else, it will be dependent on the two of them
Right.
working together and holding on to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. And I should also mention in Kern's defense here is that Gowron publicly humiliated Kern by stripping the Mogh family of all of their titles and possessions and land. So
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't really a route for Kern to say, "Well, I'm going to do my own thing." And
Yeah.
no, that actually wasn't an option for him. I should give him a break. But still, though, I guess my point though is still that he could have, on some level, like he didn't have to come to the station, I would think, and come to Worf and say, I'm just going to obey your commands. I would think that there's the possibility, but again, I guess it's just Klingon culture doesn't allow for it, of him saying, I'd rather work as a deckhand on a ship than be cast out of Klingon society. But I don't know if that's a fair Klingon.
Well, I think that you're right that he could have, but we have to remember the kind of man that Kern is and was. He was a very powerful person.
Right.
He had not just the lands and the title and everything else, but before they had all of that, he was a captain in the Klingon military. He had not only his own ship, but he commanded several other ships. Right. So, yes, the alternative was he could still live and probably eke out a living, scrubbing plasma conduits on a ship somewhere or whatever. But that would be such a mighty fall for a person who was once a commander, a leader of soldiers, to suddenly be the lowest of the low on the ship. He would have no rank. He would have no responsibility. He would just be this pariah that they stared and gawked at and probably, beat up on a bit.
Honor is such a thing in Klingon culture that if you lose it, there's no way to try and hide it from it.
Right, you can't hide the fact you've lost your honor, and it takes a long time for you to rebuild it, almost to the point of it being futile, that once it's been stripped from you in such a public and demeaning manner, there's very little you could do save a miracle to get it back, which is why they have, this ritual suicide here. Right. Once your honor has been stripped away from you so publicly and so completely, there is nothing for you to do. And again, this is something that Worf would have also had to deal with, but Worf wasn't in Klingon society. He came in, he's just visiting. He just came in, he ate the sandwich and then dipped out and went back to the Enterprise or wherever it was,
Yeah.
And they were happy to take him back. He resigned his commission and left the Enterprise. They did a whole walking out ceremony for him and everything. And then he was like, you know what? It's kind of hot in here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back. And they just took him right back. No fuss, no muss. And then he does it here. He does it in this episode, or not in this episode, but, in The Way of the Warrior, the first episode of season 4. And Gowron's like, come join me. This is your time. This is it, And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, no.
Never mind. Yeah.
So I mean, this dabbling that he does has a ripple effect that we're only now just getting to see with Kern. Which, by the way, in case you did not know, Kern is played expertly by the great Tony Todd. We've seen him multiple times in Trek, not just as Kern, but as other aliens throughout his tenure on Trek, and he's even played the older Jake Sisko from our favorite episode
of this season. Yeah.
Yes, The Visitor. Great episode. And on a side note, I did not realize exactly how tall Tony Todd is, but just for reference, Michael Dorn is like 6'3", 6'4". In the scenes where the two of them are standing close to, face to face, Kern is towering over Worf. So either they put lifts in his shoes, or the man is my height.
He's at least 2 inches, if not 3 or 4, taller than Michael Dorn is. Yeah.
Now I have not looked up Tony Todd's height. I don't know how tall he is. I do know that Michael Dorn is again 6'3", 6'4". So he's. I was thinking he must be wearing those big Klingon boots or something. But even when he wasn't in the Klingon uniform, he was taller than Worf. When he had on the Bajor uniform, and they were saying that he was significantly taller than Worf. So Tony Todd must be, I would say probably 6'8", maybe taller. You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's definitely tall, but the thing I really appreciated seeing him again as Kern, because it's been a while, obviously, was having just seen him as Jake Sisko, the older Jake Sisko, seeing his emotional range. The character of Kern and Jake Sisko are completely different characters,
yes,
and
they are.
when you
Yes,
know
they are.
when I knew that it was the same actor, I was able to see the similarities, the
The voice,
intonations,
yeah,
yeah,
certain
the voice,
intonations, yeah.
but the characters are so different. The emotional old man who is dying and expressing his regret of his father's death, and I spent my whole life trying to save my father, is very different from the Klingon Kern, who is, I mean, the
Disgusted by things comfortable and soft.
yeah, exactly. Great point. And Klingons are just a different culture. Again, I said it before, but one of the things I love about the Star Trek shows have been learning to appreciate Klingon culture. But it's also a great thing that the actors that get to play these Klingons get to have a different dynamic range with by playing those types of characters. And yeah, I think he does a good job being able to play two different types of characters, as we've seen in this very season. Again, it was episode 2 of season 4 that he was playing Jake Sisko. So it was only what 11 episodes ago, 13 episodes ago we saw that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I was. It's great to see him um, doing all that. We got to see more of Dax finally. I feel like it's been a
Yes,
while
it
since we've
it
seen
has
Dax.
been a while. We get to see Dax, and once again, it's in this Klingon light here.
I was
Her
gonna say,
insight into Klingon culture kind of alerts us that there is something going on. She's questioning Quark about Worf being in the bar earlier and what Worf wanted, and
right,
he reveals that Worf wanted some spice. It was called Adanji, and
right,
so the way she responds to it, we know that Adanji has to have some kind of significance. And because of what we heard earlier, we know that it must be in connection to the Moktavor ritual. So
right.
that
That's how
must
she
be,
figures it out. Yeah.
yeah. And so now that's why we know that there is a dangerous element to this ritual, which it's a Klingon ritual. Are there any other
To
kind
be
of rituals
fair,
for them?
the opening scene between them is them basically arguing over which better, a batleth or
Or
what's
a
the other?
mek'leth. The
And they
batleth, which is the standard weapon that we see all the Klingons use all the time, and then
right,
the
and
mek'leth is kind of like the short sword that Worf carries, and they're duking it out to see which
yeah,
is
they're
better.
arguing over their what's better by having a fight, and I guess he breaks her
Worf wins. He breaks the
yeah,
batleth. He
and
hooks
his
it into the. There's a little cleft on the mek'leth. He hooks it in, and then with his strength, he's able to snap
snap it.
her batleth.
Yeah, we
Again,
should talk about that
highlighting
scene
just
real
how
quick.
strong Worf really is. We've talked
Yes,
about this before, and we're supposed to believe that the batleths are a very heavy, very resilient weapon, and for him to be able to use his other weapon and with a little bit of leverage snap it so completely the way that he did just
right,
highlights that Klingons are a lot different. They're a
right.
lot different than we are.
So
But yeah, we could talk about that scene right now.
well,
Um,
in the moment, I'm forgetting who had which weapon. Was it Dax with the
Dax
batleth?
had the batleth. Dax had the batleth. Worf had the mek'leth. He's frequently
Okay.
had that
Because
mek'leth. Yeah,
he was
he's
saying that he feels like it's an intimidating weapon, but it makes people overconfident. That was his
That's
argument,
what
right? That
that's what he says about the batleth. He says that because she says that the batleth, with its size and overall maneuverability, makes it a better field weapon. Worf
right,
refutes this or rebuts this by saying that's a classic argument, but I feel that it's people use it because of the intimidation factor, and the intimidation makes them overconfident, whereas the mek'leth allows him greater control and versatility, and he can
right,
do more. And
right.
so, yeah, and so then she's just kind of highlighting that, yeah, he does his own little bit of, you know, intimidation and overconfidence
With
stuff,
the growling and the grunting,
yeah, which is
and then
basically kind of
and
signifying that she likes it. She's kind of into it. And
right, and then he
then,
says, "You're trying to distract me with your outfit," and she's
yeah,
like,
with
"Oh,
your,
you think I wore this for you, huh?" Which is an
right,
interesting
which,
comment.
which then we see as kind of an aside when she turns away from him that she did. She
Yeah,
wanted to get his attention, and she
yeah,
was glad that she got it.
yep.
And so
They
then
were
she,
They were
Yeah.
getting close there as they were
Yeah, and then
talking.
they're talking and they're close and everything else, and it was clear that she was kind of, you know, yeah, putting out that I'm interested vibe, and he was certainly picking up on it when they got
Right.
interrupted by
Yeah.
Odo.
The sexual
So
tension. This is the well, I guess when the in the first episode where Worf was introduced in Deep Space Nine, there was some slight sexual tension because she said something in Klingon that she refused to
translate for the rest of
translate.
us.
Yeah. But
Yes.
this is the first time since then I would say that we've ever had any sort of sexual tension between the two of them. And again, I know that they end up married or something. I don't know all the details yet, of course,
Shut
but
up, David. No
yeah.
spoilers. No
Well,
spoilers on this 30-year-old show.
um so yeah,
But yeah,
I
I
was
mean, this
looking
is
for
kind of
that.
the first time that we really get to see them together again in a non-work setting,
Right.
and seeing this kind of interplay between the two of them. And we can see she's obviously very, very playful with him and his deadpan delivery of everything, and then kind of having to backtrack over his words a bit, how that plays out as well.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they work.
Yeah.
I think they work. I think it's an interesting pairing choice. I don't know if this was like always the plan for them, and maybe we'll discover that as we go through a bit more of this and can dig through some of the stuff related to these various episodes.
Right.
Um, Actually, in reading just real quick, I just learned that that's exactly what this was. This was a test to see if Michael Dorn and Terry
Ah.
Farrell had any on-screen chemistry. They weren't
Ah.
sure how these two characters would work, because him being an actual Klingon and her being our, before he got there, she was kind of our Klingon aficionado. And so to
Right.
pair them together to see how this would play out, and
Right.
it turned out that it worked very well. They
Yeah.
said that it says that the writers were delighted to discover that they had great chemistry, and that's when the push began to make them into a couple. They weren't sure how far down the rabbit hole of coupleship they were going to go at this time, but they did
Right.
know they were going to at least explore it. And they wanted to make this kind of a clear departure from anything that Worf had cooking up on the Enterprise. So
Gotcha. Well, it's
yeah,
interesting that we have seen the two of them together in the sort of Kalis episode back on just a couple episodes ago, episode 9 of this season. They help Core find the sword of Kalis, and they were working together, but there wasn't any sexual tension there between them. They're just helping him out. At least I don't remember anything really of that type. So this
no,
is
they
the
didn't.
first time that, again, since the opening of season 4, that there's been anything like this. So yeah, I mean, makes sense that they're trying to find ways to get their characters to have interesting dynamics and relationships with each other. We got Odo having a love triangle with Kira. Um, or Cisco's love life is kind of rocky in general. Um, but yeah, so but we have to really talk more about Kern and the final choice that we have.
Yes.
Yeah,
So the great dilemma. The man wants to die, but they can't kill him.
right,
So wiping his memory, is that the same thing effectively as killing him? I mean, I guess you could argue that it is if you believe that your existence is the sum of your memories. But if you
right,
believe that you're more than that, then no. This is just kind of a band aid to a bigger problem.
right,
I'm not sure really where I fall on it. I think ultimately I like it for the fact that before I knew it anyway, it left open the possibility of a return for Kern.
right,
Like if Worf was somehow able to once again redeem himself in the eyes of the Klingon people and
right,
reestablish all of his, lands, titles, and so forth, that
right,
then they'd have a way to bring Kern back.
right,
But then it becomes meaningless, the
right.
sacrifice that they make, if they're just able to, oh, every time that you mess up, we just wipe your brain,
Yeah,
and then we'll
Bashir is very, very like he doesn't really protest all that much. In like,
yeah, Bashir.
you sure?
That's another thing. He does not protest.
Right,
He really doesn't. He's just like, are you sure you want to do this?
right.
Okay, lay
Yeah,
down.
I mean, this is not quite the same Bashir, I would say, who, I guess, like, was it season 2 where, what's the Cardassian on the station?
Garrick.
Garrick. Yeah, Garrick is having his kind of mental
Mental
breakdown because
breakdown,
his,
yeah.
and he's
Because
all like,
his
I'm not going to
control
let
chip,
you.
yeah.
Yeah. And not only is he not, I mean, he saves Kern's life when he's brought to the infirmary, but he doesn't have any sort of strong reaction to Worf of like, I can't believe Klingons would do this. I'm totally against it, or nothing like that. Like, I'm not going to leave you alone in here with him, or anything like that. And then yeah, again, he like, all right, we're gonna wipe his memories, and not just like we're gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna wipe his memories and facially restructuring and DNA. I mean, talk about like we're really
Yeah.
stretching how we could do this. Like, we're changing the DNA structure. I mean, even the 4 hour fingerprint DNA changing was an interesting sci-fi thing, but to make it a permanent change is like, whoa, hold on. I mean,
So yeah,
okay, but
that's obviously where we're just gonna, just say that's future Trek
well,
tech,
to be
you know.
fair to Star Trek, I will say that they have the idea of facial reconstruction surgery being a thing. Like, you can even, like, as we've seen, Kira was made to look like a Cardassian, and we've had people look like Romulans and look like Klingons before. So we know that something like this is possible. It's not the first time something like this has happened.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Changing people's appearance to look like any other kind of alien or whatever is certainly not new in Trek.
right, right,
Normally, that's just superficial. It's not,
right,
changing, DNA structures and so forth. And we've also
right,
seen the erasure of memory for the sake of protecting the Prime Directive. We've seen that happen many times
right,
in Next Generation and Voyager and the original series. They've all done it at
right,
some point, to protect the core Federation here.
right,
Um, Now, I can see where some people would say that it was an immoral act to do this to Kern because he would have been able to. He's still able to function. He just needed to learn how to cope with his new status in life and find
right,
a new way to fulfill himself. But we have to remember, again, he's Klingon, and
right,
their culture views all of these things entirely differently than
right,
we do.
right,
Again, to highlight this, we can go back to the Next Generation episode where Worf gets hit in the back by the very big barrel that's up way high for no reason other than to kill
yeah,
somebody. And
yeah,
it hits him and breaks his spine, and he's paralyzed. And he
right,
decides that the only thing he can do at this point is commit suicide, and
right,
he wants Riker to do it. And
right,
even in that, in that moment, Beverly was adamant about not doing it. She's, he can regain
yes,
up to 60% of his mobility. He can live a happy, productive life. There's no reason for this. And again, Picard argues with her. He's like, you are looking at him as a human, trying to justify why he shouldn't do this thing. He is not human. His
right,
culture doesn't view these things the same way that we do. And yes,
right,
Worf was raised by humans, but we know he has always turned to Klingon society. He has
right,
always tried to do things in the most Klingon way possible.
that he can,
So
right,
whenever he can, that's correct. So again, there was no reason for us to think that he would not do this otherwise.
right,
When it comes to performing this ritual, of course he was going to perform the ritual. I know that it was a shocker to see him stab Kern. There were so many people, I'm sure, who didn't think he was actually going to do it. I have to admit, I was one of few that when it came up, I knew he was going to do it. I knew
yeah.
he was going to do it because,
I have to say I was a little not, but keep going. Sorry, I'm interrupting
well,
you. Keep going.
only because again, he wants to be Klingon. He wants to be viewed as a proper Klingon so bad, and
Right,
he recognized that Kern was right. The way that Kern laid out everything for him, Kern was right. So the only thing to do was the Mock Devor ritual. There was no
right,
other option. So yes, Worf was going to do it. He might have been upset by it, but he was going to do it. And now at the end, when they do this memory erasure, it's a way for him to kind of walk the line once again. That even more says he's tried to walk, straddling that line between Federation and Klingon, and he felt like he had done it so well for a long time. This
right,
gives him that ability once again. he's able to honor Kern by granting his request and, you know, basically killing him. He's
Right.
the one who authorizes the procedure.
Right.
But Kern, or the body anyway, is still alive. He's still there. He's walking and talking. No murder was. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the best of both worlds. It satisfies both. As far as the
Right.
Klingons are concerned, Kern is dead.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, are your memories the soul, some of who you are? The real, of course, I think part of the answer to that question is, are his memories retrievable? Because Bashir definitely leaves an opening there. He says it's almost impossible for the memories to come back, and
Right.
that's why I was like, yeah, we're gonna see Kern again. I mean, as an example, I love the Bourne Identity movie. You probably have seen it. The Bourne Identity, Matt
Mm.
Damon. The whole premise of the story is he's forgot his memories. Very common trope in fiction. You know, amnesia, spy, has abilities, has a history, and he has to figure out what it is. And I feel like this episode does a decent job of explaining how he might not have to really worry about trying to get his true memories back. He has someone who's going to help explain a false history to him. But I feel like, golly, that is really difficult. I mean, do Klingons have pictures? How are they going to fake pictures from, when he was a child? Father, I'll follow you. So it's a stretch for me, is what I'm getting at. Is like the way to put a bow around this by the end of the episode is we have to have him go off with someone who is gonna help keep the deception real.
Yeah.
And okay, fine, that's how we're gonna do it. The only problem is that it seems like it could fall apart with it's a house of cards in terms of how easy it would be to find out there's a problem with all this. Like, there's got to be someone out there who's like, you've never had a son. That doesn't look like your son, even if you had one. Like, there's got to be someone out there being like, you look a lot like that Kern guy who was on the High Council once upon a time. But whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
No, I mean, we're kind of left to believe that, like, again, the family that he goes to join, he says it's a small but proud family. They're not, up on the radar the way say the Mogh family was at one point.
right.
So I think that there's a greater possibility of them getting away with it because of that. There's
Right.
no one, there's not enough eyes on them.
Right. Right.
Also, we don't know how many sons, daughters, whomever this guy has. We
Yeah.
don't know. And if
This is my
one had,
long lost son. I just
right.
found him. I didn't know where he was, but yeah.
And it doesn't really seem like Klingons do keep, facial records. Everything's kind of done on word of mouth and establishment of your honor and people vouching for you along the way. And it seems like as long as enough people say you are who you say you are, they're kind of okay with it.
Right.
So yeah, as long as there's, nothing really, to red flag anything, it's like, oh, this guy, here's another son of whatever that guy's name was. I forget what the name of the family was that he joined. And they just like, another one. How many does that make for him? I don't know, 17, 18. I don't know. He's got a lot.
He's a small house, but he's going to populate himself into a big one.
But as long as everybody knows who that guy is and knows he's got a lot of children, they don't really care. They don't really seem to care about anything else.
Yep.
That is enough for them. We know him. We know his family has a prolific history. That's enough. That's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they do leave it open for the possibility of Kern coming back. As you've already spoiled for us, we know that he doesn't. But still, I think that was
for me, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that was another kind of wink and a nod Trek thing. We never really truly closed the book on anybody.
Yeah.
We
Until
always
you see a dead body.
Heck, even if you see a dead body, because Tasha died, and then we saw her daughter pop up as Sela later on. So yeah, I mean, there's just that doesn't mean anything. There's always ways. Hell, Spock has died so many times it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just and that guy just keeps popping up. So no one's death is truly final in Trek. If they want you back, they'll get you back. So yeah. But yeah, I still think that at least for this, I think I like how they handled it. I feel like it was very sad that once again Worf is called upon to make these sacrifices to kind of in a way, in a very broad way, protect the Klingon Empire, but also protect the Federation. And he gets like no thanks for it.
Right.
He has now effectively averted a war of the Klingons against the Federation, which, regardless of whether or not the Federation would have won, it would have been costly.
Right.
He's now helped them to avert this war. He's saved all the countless Klingon lives to do it as well. And now, once again, like not only has his land and title, it's like they just keep taking stuff from him. You took his land, you took his title, his family, his mother and father were murdered when he was a kid and everything else. And now you've taken his brother. Can somebody give this man something, please? Like somebody, please recognize that this guy is awesome and he keeps sacrificing stuff for you all. And no one ever says thank you.
Right.
So gets on my nerves, and maybe that's why I like him so much. I'm like, man, everybody's just he's so underappreciated. And then even when you talk about him, the first thing anybody wants to bring up is, oh well, I mean, Worf was a crappy father, whatever. He was suddenly saddled with a kid that he knew nothing about, that he never wanted.
Yeah.
Like there's
definitely dropped that on him.
Kalar got pregnant and dipped out. Right, she didn't stay in contact. She didn't tell him. She didn't do anything. She just showed up with a 3-year-old.
She was a
great
character.
There's your daddy.
Yeah. She was a great character, but that was definitely a real jerk move.
Right. And then she went and got herself murdered, and now he's left with this kid that he had no expectation. He had no time to prepare. I mean, nothing. No gestation period to get used to the fact that, oh, I'm going to be a father in a couple of months. Nothing. He had nothing. Suddenly he didn't even just have a baby. He had a walking, talking 3-5-year-old kid, however old Alexander was when he was, dropped in his quarters.
Yeah, I mean,
it
seems like the Klingon kids, when I think about it, grow up pretty fast because his son
they do grow
like 8 by the.
Yeah, they do grow pretty fast. I mean, by the end of Next Generation, I would say that Alexander was 8 to 10 years old.
But the show's only on for 7 seasons, so
But
not a problem. It's Klingons grow differently. Fine,
trickery.
whatever.
They age differently.
But
go ahead.
I was just gonna say the other thing I liked with this episode. I did like that this episode had a B plot. I think again the last episode suffered from not having a B plot. But this B plot is that the Klingons are trying to plant a minefield outside of Bajoran space. Great military tactic. If it had worked, man. Worf convinces Kern to help him infiltrate the Klingon ship by saying like, oh, the Klingons would never win against the Federation. They might drag out into some long civil war of sorts, but ultimately the Federation will win. And Kern agrees. That's why he voted against the war against the Cardassians. But I do have to critique the B plot, though, because I feel like the Klingon ship that gets damaged and then they tow it back to Deep Space Nine, I don't think the Klingons would have gone willingly. I think they should have said, we're going to tow you back. Like, the Klingons were like, no, don't take us. And they're like, nope, we're going to help you out. We don't have the resources here. You need our help. We're going to drag you away. And I wish it had been just a little more confrontational in that moment. Because I feel like if they're trying to plant a minefield and trying to hold out and, not...
And be secretive and don't want the Federation to know about it, why would you give them access to your battle cruiser so easily?
Exactly. Because Worf and Kern are able to do the infiltration, but I feel like no Klingon would have just gone quietly into that good night, if you know what I mean. Like they would have. Also, if that's a military exercise they're trying to protect. They would have fought.
I also wondered, why did they take Worf and Kern? Like, I mean, yes, they're Klingons, but why didn't Odo go? Odo could have slipped in and out, no problem.
We've seen him do that before.
Right now, I could see the use of Kern, because Kern had military codes that were still useful.
Yes.
So I could see that, but why wasn't it Kern and Odo paired together? Odo could have kept in line, and then the officer who comes in and confronts them later on, him attempting to kill Odo would have been nothing.
Right.
So I don't see why that didn't happen. Now I get it that this was, again, it's a Mogh, Sons of Mogh episode We need to feature Worf and so forth. But at the same time, I'm just saying there were other ways they could have gone about accomplishing their mission
Right.
that wouldn't have required both of them, those particular two, going.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to Worf and Kern doing it together, other for the plot of the episode at the very least. My bigger problem is the whole idea that, you know, Worf didn't see the guy was pulling a knife. He couldn't see it in his eyes. It's a Klingon intuitive trait to know when someone. It's like, wait a minute, come on, don't. I hate when I hate it when races are given too many stereotypical things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, Klingons can like see it in someone's eyes, even an alien race, even like they
So
can
yeah,
always tell. That
that's one of
seems
those warrior training instinct things. That's kind of a rip on Japanese ninjas, and what's the other ones? Man, I can't believe I
samurai.
forgot. Yes, yes, being able to like size up your opponent and know when they're going to
Right.
strike and be in their
I
mind.
would
And
have rather that moment have been that Worf realizes something and just tries to disarm the guy, and Kern just kills him. Like maybe Kern's
well,
being careless now. He's like, if I'm going to commit to this path, I'm going to fully commit. I'm not going to be like you, Worf, and try and pull a Federation type stun move. I don't do stun. I don't set my phaser to stun. I set it to kill kind of moment.
I liked it because it highlighted how again the difference between Worf and Kern. That Worf is all of his actions are from a person who has studied everything there is to study about Klingon culture. He's absorbed
Right.
all of that. Whereas Kern is a person who's lived it. He's
Right.
practiced it. It's
Right.
instinctual for him. It's not a
Right.
second nature thought to him. That's his whole life. So he was
Right.
able to. So when Worf is addressing this officer, he's doing it from this very, this kind of bookish, studied approach to Klingon culture. If I shout
Right.
you down and claim to be of a superior rank and I dress you down in a certain way, then then the expectation is that he is going to cower and back down, and we will then be able to carry on doing what we've got to do. Whereas Kern's
Right.
like, that only works like maybe 25% of the time. The other time, they're just going to fight you and you
Right.
you didn't even see it. He was so ready to attack you, you didn't even notice. So
Right.
yeah, I liked it for that part, kind of further highlighting this distinction between the two of them. And Worf
Right.
goes on to kind of illuminate on that, and he says the same thing. I was looking him right in his face, and I didn't see that he was ready to attack me. Take out the whole he was ready to kill me and change it, because Klingons use attack and kill interchangeably. So if you take that out and just be like, I was right in front of him, and I couldn't tell by the way he was standing and staring and the way he was talking to me that he was preparing himself to attack me.
Right.
I'm a trained warrior officer myself, and I couldn't see that this
Yeah.
guy standing directly in front of me was getting ready to attack me. Whereas Kern, who was 3 feet away, partially blocked by my body,
Right.
could see that this guy was getting ready to attack me, and he saved my life.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's again interesting dynamic. I'm sad that it's gone, but
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how the whole Klingon aspect of Worf continues to play out. I'm assuming we'll have plenty of opportunities to see how he,
Yes, yes, we will.
how he does his own thing. But
So
yeah,
this kind
go
of
ahead.
also goes back into one of those things I talk about a lot, which is filler episodes. This is an episode that it does kind of obliquely play into the larger overall plot of Deep Space Nine, but at the same time, we don't have a whole lot here that is dependent upon a whole lot of anything else. It's great information for us that will come
Right.
into play later through several other episodes, but
Right.
it doesn't directly reference the episode that came before it or the episode that comes after it.
Right.
So it's just it's a nice filler episode, but
Yeah.
it helps us to understand Worf better, to
Yeah.
understand Jadzia and their development better. Cisco's stance on kind of the same issue here better. We get these greater understandings of all these characters because of this kind of episode.
Right.
This is something that I feel like is entirely lacking in new Trek because we don't have a season that is 22, 24, sometimes 26 episodes long anymore.
Right.
We've got 10 or 12 or sometimes 13 episode
Right.
seasons. So now every episode has to be this high octane emotional roller coaster that just, it hits you every single time. And it gets to the point where you're totally desensitized to what's going on and there's no connection to the characters that you have been watching. And then I say all this because I was recently talking about Discovery, and that was one of the main complaints about the show was that they tried to like heavily assault us with this emotional whatever for certain characters, only to then kill the character. There was a character called Ariam on Discovery, and they did this, and there was this whole lead up to the character, all in one episode, where we see her, get engaged, and then she's got this accident, which kind of makes her like basically a robot, and then she, at the very end ends up kind of halfway saving the day before they have to like sacrificially kill her. So you had this whole thing where you were supposed to like really emote and connect to this character only to watch them die. And so everybody was like, well, it really kind of sucks. Like there was no chance for me to really connect with the character. And I'm like, that's because we don't have episodes where we would have watched her maybe talk about her engagement party or what her wedding was like, or I don't know, maybe even done the wedding on the ship or something. They've done that before.
Yeah.
And then there was another character that everybody seems to really like from Discovery, Saru. And, they talked about how great that character development is. And I'm like, yeah, but Saru was in every episode. So you get to see more and more of him all the time. He's consistently in every episode. So yes, you get the development. So we miss out on that by them shortening everything down. And so when people say that Discovery is not a great show, I'm like, it's not that it's not a great show. We just need more of it. It would actually be a better show if we got more stuff like this. And this is yet another great example. So that's my little Discovery rant tie-in there.
Yeah, I definitely agree that this way of telling stories where you get more time to be slow about your storytelling means you get to water the storytelling. Whereas as you just described it, you plant the seed and you're like, you got that camera zoomed in on it and you're watching.
Right, it's like a time lapse. It's a time lapse. They've sped it up. We watched them put the seed in the pot, and then it's sprouting already, and then it's dead by the end of the episode.
As opposed to the magic of like turning around and coming back, and hey, the plant is now blooming. It was a little seed, and now it's sprouting, and now it's blooming, and
it's a totally. And they do it because, I understand that production costs have, skyrocketed and salaries being what they are and everything else. But at the same time, it's just like, this is why the shows don't last, because you force us to try to make these connections to characters and then it's just not there. And so we've got all these great characters who had great potential in the beginning, but then it's wholly squandered because we never have enough time to watch them actually grow and develop. And even the characters that we do get to see, beyond a certain select few, the changes that they end up making are such huge leaps from one episode to the next, it doesn't make sense. So the connection that you made one week is now gone the next week. So you need things that kind of gradually give you that bit of, that sense of passage of time and people changing with it, and then overall consistency. And, highlight great characters to do that who were secondary characters who then became primary focus characters. Miles O'Brien is a great example of this. He started out as unnamed tech chief number whatever on the Enterprise, on the pilot episode of Next Generation. And now we see him as chief of operations, Miles O'Brien, because they did all these things that sprinkled in his story throughout all of the intervening years.
Right.
Nog is another example. When Deep Space Nine first starts, he's a small-time thief helping be lookout for other thieves to steal things. And we watched him grow from being a thief to someone who couldn't read, to learning to read, to understanding responsibility, to staying out of trouble and working, and finally accepted into Starfleet Academy. He's off at the Academy right now.
Yeah.
Great character development that didn't happen all in one episode or or anything like that. It was a B plot actually, but it
Yeah.
actually turned out to be the better story in the episode when he finally gives his speech to Cisco about why he wants to be in Starfleet. But we needed all of these episodes to get us to kind of be like, oh, look at this little scamp trying to change
Yeah.
his ways. Isn't he great? All that
Yeah.
is now gone,
Right.
in the new Trek stuff, completely
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just another one of my reasons for why I think the Discovery has great potential, and people should go and watch it or go back and watch it and pay better attention to it. And, really just say we don't need less of that show. We need more. We need more.
Gotcha.
All right, well, I've thoroughly taken us off topic and and to the end of the episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, final thoughts on the Sons of Mogh. What do you think?
I'm sad the character of Kern will be gone. I do think he was a great, again, foil for Worf. Yeah, it's one of those episodes that I have some small critiques about. Again, is this solution for Kern, losing his memory? Is that a good solution, a realistic solution? But Worf is a great character. Learning more about Klingons is always fun. There was a decent B plot to keep the action going while the main story was happening, and it tied in. It wasn't like a B plot that just happened all by itself, and then we just back and forth. It tied in the two stories together by the end. So yeah, not perfect, but good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, like I said, I find this episode a very interesting episode. I like the overall development that we get here for Worf, and just kind of seeing him, once again, just kind of being on the outs with everybody. Cisco's not too thrilled with him right now. He's lost his brother, so forth and so on. But yeah, I do overall like this episode.
Well, I guess before we end,
yeah.
I guess I forgot to say, yeah, the whole idea of Picard versus Cisco's reaction. Do you think
we didn't
Picard
do
would
it,
have yelled
Picard.
at Worf? Do you think Picard would have yelled at Worf?
Oh,
like
I
Cisco
think that
did?
I think that considering their history and this being would have been, I guess, like the second or third time that Worf has chosen Klingon culture over
Federation.
Starfleet.
Yeah.
I think that I think Picard would have dismissed him. I think he would have.
That'd been like a final straw type thing.
I think he would have discharged him and just been like, "You
Wow.
can't," because Picard is so hardcore about the rules, and this would have been again the second or third time that he's talked to Worf about this particular issue.
Do you think Worf?
That,
sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
I think that even if whether Kern lived or died, I think that Picard would have dismissed him. If he didn't dismiss him outright from Starfleet, just discharged him, court-martialed him, whatever it is, I think he would have placed him on prolonged leave and ordered him off the station or off the ship.
Wow.
And been like, don't come back until you guys have worked all of this out completely. Yeah.
So if Worf and Kern had, gone away to some location in private and done the ritual in some private area, and then Worf came back and Kern didn't come back, do you think that would have been acceptable? Like,
oh no, he would have.
You did your Klingon culture stuff away from the station, away from the Enterprise. I don't have to know what happened, or
no, because I think that Picard would have known anyway. Whether Worf told him, yeah, we just hopped over to planet whatever, and I stabbed him and buried him. Yeah. Even whether he tells him or not, Picard would have known when Worf showed up without Kern. Yeah. Picard would have known, and even then, I think he would have come to Worf and been like, I don't think that you belong in Starfleet anymore. I just kind of a aside in Worf's quarters, come in and be like,
you're trying to be Klingon, and that just can't. This type of behavior can't gel with Federation culture.
Yeah, once again, your Klingon beliefs have come up against what you represent as a Federation, as a Starfleet officer. Once again, I'm having to kind of tell you that, we've got all these other cultures who put all of that stuff aside when they sign up and be a member of Starfleet. It's not just about being a member of the Federation. You have gone one step further, and you are a member of Starfleet, the the face of the Federation. So
Right. Do
if
you
you can't put those cultural differences aside, you can't be here. And despite you saying yes, you can, it's clear you can't. So
right? Do you think
peace.
the Federation Klingon war was inevitable then? Because Federation and Klingon culture, as much as they've tried to gel, just never can truly
Um,
mesh.
no, I don't think it's inevitable. Well, I guess I'd say yes and no. I think that initially it, it was inevitable there would be some kind of conflict because Klingons seem to attack what is unknown to them. They have this fear of the other, and so out of a fear of being perceived as weak, they would have attacked the Federation. But once the Federation responded and showed them that they were a force to be reckoned with,
Right.
um, it would have taken some time, and yes, a lot of people probably would have died. But I think that a truce would have been established,
Well, that's
and
kind of
that's
what's
kind of
happening
what we
now,
see, and that's
right?
kind of what we see in Discovery. I know that you haven't watched it, but that's kind of the whole point of the first Klingon human war is that the Klingons kept viewing humans as weak. In fact, they didn't even view them as people; they viewed them as another food source. So that was kind of the major part of their conflict there, and it gets to a point where they have to kind of prove that not only are we, you know, not food,
Intelligent,
but we're strong, right?
right?
But I believe that ultimately, would we see a true blending of Klingons with like a just instead of there being Klingon space or Federation space, it was all just Federation space or whatever, and everybody's in Starfleet or whatever. I don't think that would ever happen. The cultures are too different, and Starfleet requires you giving up a lot of certain aspects of your society in order to be recognized as a member world of the Federation.
Right.
And there are too many rituals, and the caste system alone would keep them out.
Right.
That's not allowed under the Federation Charter. You can't have a caste system hierarchy of any kind. Everybody's equal. Everybody gets the same treatment, the same representation, same access to
Yeah.
resources, education, and so forth.
Yeah.
That's like the main rule. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like an alliance makes sense for a time, but the differences would cause conflict at some point. Not from the Federation side per se, as we've seen the Klingons being like, "This is our culture, this is how we do stuff." You're messing with my jive, man.
yeah. And
So
and the Klingons, they
interesting.
like to have a good time, and part of that good time is often a lot of killing of other things, and
Yeah.
the Federation doesn't really do that. So yeah, it's
Yeah. Again, I gotta say, I
we can
really
respect your differences, but we're not gonna partake in that.
right. Well, it's just a another great example of I think the Klingon culture is probably the greatest success Star Trek has had for me personally. Is they're an interesting culture. I can it's a sci-fi fictional show. I can get behind the idea that it's fictional and therefore explore this fictional culture and race and how their culture might work. How might it make sense? It's alien, but there's enough there to like go,
Yeah,
okay, maybe.
I
It's
agree.
fascinating. I think it's the best thing they've
Yeah,
again the greatest success in my opinion they've had. So
I agree. I mean, I think that there was a hope that it was going to be Vulcan society, Vulcan culture would be the one that we kind of leaned on and or leaned into the most. And there are certain aspects of that for sure. But yes,
right,
I think that the Klingons are probably the best overall developed that we've seen
right,
from their inception in the 60s all the way to now. Even on Discovery, some of the things they do on there to kind of further things along, whatever. It's still a better development than we've seen of any other race
right,
in Trek. I would say the Cardassians would be a second,
right.
because even the Romulans, as much as we've gotten from the Romulans over the years, I really don't feel like we've gotten as much insight into them as we would the Klingons or the Cardassians or even the Borg. I feel like we know more about the Borg than we do Romulans, which is weird, but that's that's just how it goes.
Yeah, I would think I have I think I would say the reason for that is simply that, as a critique of Romulans and Vulcans, it's the idea of a culture that's so logic based that they like deny emotion is something that on a surface level is kind of interesting, but Klingon culture is the opposite almost, like emotional, and that's more fun for storytelling. Like the
Hmm.
emotional storytelling is more fun than here's what happens next. I'm basically a robot. I know I'm
Well,
over.
and
I'm over.
yeah,
I'm over.
yeah,
I'm
you're
over dramatized.
oversimplifying.
I'm
Yeah, you're
oversimplifying.
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 But
Um,
I get what you're saying, and I mean, like,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, I think that the Vulcans are always kind of uh, presented as what we could become when we were our ultimate best selves. Would be like that Vulcan esque level of clarity, but it's wholly unrealistic, you know. So yeah, I mean, there are certain things about. Don't get me wrong, certain things about the Vulcans that certainly has an appeal,
Right.
but yeah, I think that the Klingons just make more sense. I mean, once you take away a lot of, especially a lot of the ritualistic stuff about them, once you take away a lot of this stuff, they're a lot like us,
Right.
in a good way. You know,
Right.
family is everything. They love a good party. They don't back down from a fight. We always think those are things that we, have in common. They're an
Right.
honorable people who try to live honorable lives. What they view as honorable seems to change from Klingon to Klingon, but there is a sense of a guiding code, a principle of life
Right.
for them, that
Right.
we can appreciate. So yeah,
Right.
and this
Yeah.
episode shows that as well. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow. I took this over by bringing that up
yeah,
about
it's okay.
Picard
That's
versus
okay.
Cisco.
Great,
So
great stuff. We love our Picard v Cisco moments, and we haven't
yeah.
had one in a while. This
Yeah.
episode finally gave us a chance to. This would be the first time that I would say that they were closely aligned. Cisco still kind of he comes off a bit softer here in the sense of he didn't dismiss Worf, but I will say I think that the only reason why he does not discharge Worf right away is because he might not have known about him storming over and killing Duras from the Enterprise. He might not have known
Oh.
about it.
Yeah.
Picard has a
Huh.
previous history with Worf, and knowing how Worf tends to deviate and lean more towards Klingon culture than following Federation regulations,
Right.
and that this would have been like the last straw for him, and he just been like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cisco on the other hand is like, you're a good officer, but yeah, don't do this again, like ever again, because yeah,
Right.
uh, great scene, by the way.
Yeah.
Avery Brooks, once again, fantastic. I felt his anger. I felt his anger. I loved it, and
Yeah.
it was great.
He always has a way of, Cisco angry is a very
Oh,
thing.
it
Is a
was
very
it was
certain thing.
great.
Yeah.
My favorite part is at the end where Jadzia's like, "It won't happen again." He's like, "You're damn right. Now get
Yeah.
out." I was like,
Yeah. I was
"Yes."
gonna say very. And then in the very next scene, he's talking. Who is he talking to?
But he's talking to Kira and O'Brien because they're
That's
relaying their
right.
report to him, and she's like,
Oh,
"Do you want me to take Worf?" And he's like, "I don't want Worf anywhere near any other Klingons." It was like he's
right.
still mad.
And then O'Brien's like, "Sir," and
Space
he's
Dad,
like,
yeah, Space
"Yeah,
Dad's still mad. You might want to leave.
yeah, yeah." And
And
then
then
O'Brien's
O'Brien's
like,
like,
"Sir,
sir, but
I already
he's like,
got one officer trying to defend it.
right.
Don't you dare!" Yeah.
Don't you test me,
Yeah.
O'Brien. Get out of here. So yeah, it's a great scene. Great scene. Avery Brooks once again does a great
Yeah.
job. So now I've taken us over, bringing us back to all this. It's
Yeah.
fine. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll just end it here in the next 2 minutes, and I just want to use that time to say, if you are following along with Strange New Worlds, the most recent episode, All the Lotus Eaters, is actually a great episode. Not as good as Astra Aspera, that one episode, but this one episode, and there are some TOS callbacks, which we'll go into that later. But I'm just saying, if you pay attention to the episode, there's a lot of TOS callbacks to that one in there as well. The show overall, I think, is doing a great job. I just want more of it. Like, again, more filler episodes would help us out here with some of the characters that we still haven't got to see much of in this entire show run. Now, granted, this is only the second season or whatever, but still,
Right.
they could give us more.
Yeah.
Other than that, all other things Trek seem to have come to a complete halt. Prodigy is canceled. I told you guys about the petition to keep it going. At last report, they were at 200,000 signatures on that. I don't know if they've gotten any more since the last time I checked. But even with all those signatures, I'm not sure that it's going to get the saving swoop in that everybody's hoping. Section 31 on pause. Starfleet Academy on pause. Discovery, the final season is supposed to come out like in a couple of months. So,
Right.
yeah, after that, I think that they're just kind of like going to just run with Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds for a little bit, and then we'll just kind of see what happens. But it seems like as quickly as it began, the golden era of, or the renaissance of Trek is coming to a close.
Hmm.
So, but stay tuned. We'll see. And if you tune back in here, I'll try to keep you updated every week. You can find us and follow us anywhere you do your social medias, except for Twitter, because I've pretty much given up now. And you can listen to us anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.